Hey everybody, welcome back to Young Engineers of Today. Hope you had a good weekend. And I hope you enjoyed Arduino. If not, I hope you're ready to move on. Because we actually, I know it's a bit of an abrupt change, but we're actually going to move on to another topic today. And we're going to continue with that at least until Thanksgiving. So I wanted to get started on it as soon as possible so we could cover as much of it as possible before we actually, broke for the Thanksgiving break and met up again afterwards, because after that we're going to be moving on to another topic, as I understand it. So we'll get started on it today. We'll get as much done as we can in the next couple of weeks. What are you thankful for? Aw, appreciate it. I'm thankful for you guys because you guys make it a lot more interesting. Otherwise, I'd just be talking to a computer screen, and that would be kind of crazy. Um, so, thanks, you guys, for continuing to show up and humoring me. Um, Even though I know you guys paid money for it and you probably want to get your money's worth out of it. At any rate, we're going to get as much of this done as we can because we've got what? Today, we got Wednesday, we got next Monday, and potentially next Wednesday, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't tell you for sure right now because I don't know. But certainly you guys will be notified beforehand, before next Wednesday, whether or not we're actually still going to be um, having a class the day before Thanksgiving. Hello, Mateo. How's it going? In the past, we've tried that, but I think historically attendance has been pretty low, so I think chances are decent that we won't have it, but, I don't want to speak too soon. Good. Glad to hear you're good. So, bridges, they're a thing, right? Use them at least decently often, if not every day, depending upon where your drive home from school or wherever it takes you, or work if you happen to have a job right now, or your trip to the grocery store, or whatever. Odds are decent that you've used a bridge some point in the last few days. Odds are probably pretty close to 100%, if not 100%, that you've used a bridge at some point in the last year. And I'm pretty sure you would belong in a record book somewhere if you've never used a bridge at all in your entire life. Bridges are everywhere. And I mean, they're not just limited to like, footbridges, although there are those. You've got bridges over water for cars. You've got bridges over other roads. You got bridges that, yeah, trains used to go over roads. You've got roads that go over train tracks and use bridges. You've got footpaths that go over train tracks and over roads. You've got bridges that go between buildings. You've got bridges that, go over canyons and stuff. And it's, yeah, anyway, bridge this, bridge that, bridge everywhere. However, there is a lot of preparation and thought and planning that goes into building a bridge. Because bridges don't exist in a vacuum, to use the term, literally and also figuratively. Um, Bridges have to contend with the physical world in many different ways. Um, they have to basically endure a number of forces that are exerted on them at any given moment. In fact, different parts of the bridge can experience different forces. But what forces exactly am I talking about? Well, let's spend a moment going over those. So, Bridges have to deal with compression. So this is the example I used in my middle school class, but you know, you think um, maybe take a paper towel roll and just like the tube that's in the very middle, take it, place one hand on each end, and then just like press inwards as hard as you can. That would be like compression. And yeah, Cohen nailed the other one. Tension. Exact opposite. Take your hands and just pull. Try and pull the paper towel tube apart. Bridges have to deal with that as well. Bridges also have to deal with shear force. So again, in this example, take the paper towel tube, put one hand just off to the side at the top and one hand just off to the side at the bottom on opposite sides, and then just push inwards. So you might, you know, in this example, it doesn't exactly work perfectly because obviously the paper towel roll tube, paper towel tube, roll tube, towel, paper, roll tube. Ugh, I can't talk. Well, that's kind of, yeah, like that's certainly an expression of shear force. But like if it was affixed in place, it would also have to deal with shear force as other things around it are moving around. So it might be pulled in one direction while, you know, the top of it's being pulled in another direction, or it might be pulled in one direction while the bottom of it's being fixed in place, and so it has to try and, you know, not bend and break, that kind of thing. But yeah, bridges pretty much deal with those three forces, some combination of those three forces, all the time. All the time, from moment to moment, forever. And they come from a number of different places, but they do have to deal with those, and that's one of the things that engineers who are building bridges have to worry about. But where might these forces come from? Well, they come from loads. Loads being different stresses on the bridge. It's also important to note that different parts of the bridge could be experiencing different forces at any given moment. One part of the bridge might be experiencing compression because another part of the bridge is experiencing tension. And yet another part is experiencing shear, that sort of thing. So, you know, you don't necessarily, like, you'll have to worry about more than one force at any given time, too. Anyway, loads. Loads will cause stresses on the bridge. The most basic load, and if you can't have a bridge that handles this load, then you've not built a very good bridge, let's be perfectly honest, is a dead load, which is just the weight of the bridge itself. So you build a bridge out of materials, those materials aren't going to weigh nothing. We haven't devised entirely weightless materials yet, and you know, we have to deal with gravity. It's a fact of life. It's reality. So the materials themselves are going to, are going to exert forces on the bridge just by virtue of the fact that they exist. Your body exerts force on itself by virtue of the fact that, you know, you weigh something. Like your head exerts a force on your neck. Your arms exert a force on your shoulders and your back. Your torso exerts a force on your legs. You know, it's just kind of how it is. Bridges are no different. So bridges have to deal with a dead load, which is the weight of the bridge itself. Bridges also have to deal with live loads, which is the weight that the bridge is carrying. Yeah, and with you. And also with you, that's what it is. So people on the bridge, vehicles on the bridge, whatever. Now, there are a couple different kinds of live loads. Live loads could be static, so the load is still. So those could be, toll booths and signs and things like that. Or they could be dynamic and moving. So they could be cars. And it's important to note that, like in this example here, loads can move between static and dynamic. A car could be driving across the bridge, hit traffic, and have to stop. And they've just gone from a dynamic load to a static load. Then the traffic lets up and the car can start moving again, and they've gone from a static load back to a dynamic load. So it's not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility that loads are going to stay either static or dynamic. So you have to deal with that as well. Then you got thermal load, which is basically just load created by the earth making the bridge hot or cold. So it's a really sunny day, bridge could get hot. Dead of winter after it's been snowing, bridge will get cold. Clear night in the dead of winter, bridge will get cold. And these can actually be loads on the bridge as well because, how many of you have accidentally stuck a drink in the freezer overnight and had the drink either overflow or explode? Once you remember it the next day. If you have, that's because thermal expansion is a thing. Water, as it goes from a liquid to a solid, expands. And that actually causes all sorts of havoc for infrastructure for just a number of reasons. But nothing is really exempt from this rule that thermal expansion exists. Bridges are no exception. As things get colder or warmer, the bridge will, individual struts on the bridge and things like that will contract or expand. And by virtue of the fact that they're doing that, they will cause stress on other parts of the bridge. If you've got one strut in particular that tends to be very, susceptible to thermal expansion, it might expand due to temperature changes, in which case it's causing compression force on itself. It might be causing tension force on something else that's linked to it. It might be causing shear force on 3 or 4 different things which are linked to it. It might be causing compression force on like 2 other things which are linked to it. Suddenly the bridge is experiencing a whole lot of force around this one strut because, temperature changes. More obviously, there are earthquake loads, which is a load created by shaking the bridge. Seems pretty self-explanatory. You got wind loads created by wind shaking the bridge, causing it to, sway or vibrate. And those can actually be really, really super nasty, much more so than you might anticipate. If you're thinking like, oh, if your building falls over because the wind blew it over, then you got a really bad building. Or if your bridge falls over because the wind blew it over, what a bad bridge. And yeah, okay, you wouldn't be wrong, but not necessarily for the reasons that you're thinking. There are physics glitches, which is not really a proper way to put it, but it's kind of the way I like to think of it, that can do surprising things to structures. But yeah, this is something that, and aside from the fact that wind is just really, it's super strong, like it's ridiculously strong. So, yep, definitely. That's actually something we touch on a little bit later on in the lesson is an example of a bridge that's collapsed because of wind. A large bridge. But yeah, wind is also just surprisingly crazy strong. So that's also something, that's a reason why you have to deal with that kind of thing. So now we've got forces that the bridge can undergo, and we've got loads that can cause those forces. You might also want to talk about the materials that you can build a bridge out of. Now, it's important to note that, as with anything, different materials are going to be good for different reasons. So you're not going to have one catch-all material, although generally there are materials which are across the board better. Um, but again, it's what you're looking to build. Um, but yeah, so it's important to go over the materials that the bridge can be built out of. The labs aren't really all that interesting. It's just kind of like you click on a thing, if it ends up working, which is not guaranteed. You kind of click on a thing and you go like, oh, the bridge is under load now. But like, it's not really very interactive necessarily. Um, anyway, so materials are also an important thing to take into account. Like for instance, you can build your bridge out of wood, and then you have you got a wooden bridge. Yeah, exactly. That's another one, Colin. Um, and a wooden bridge can be pretty good because wooden bridge is pretty cheap, and you know it can also handle tension and compression pretty well. It's like it's strong, but it's also pretty like flexible. So like the bridge starts to kind of like compress at one point, and the wood's like, no problem, I got you. And then another part's going to start to stretch out a little bit, and the wood's like, nah, it's all good. Just let me know when you're done, and I'll go back to my normal length. And it's fine, and it does that very well. On the other hand, though, I mean, it is super cheap too, which is really good because it's just a tree. It's just you just took a tree and you just kind of shaped it. But yeah, on the other hand, like you guys were saying, wood can rot. You have to replace those pieces that rot. It can bow, which means you have to replace it with fresh wood because at a certain point, if you bend wood enough, it's going to stick in that particular way, which is kind of how like old boats were built and stuff like that. New boats are still built like that too, wooden boats. That's still how boats are built. How many times can I repeat myself? But that will cause stress on the bridge if you've got a piece of wood that is bowed because of age and force is exerting on it and things like that. It's not going to be able to hold its weight nearly as well as other pieces of wood that are nice and new and fresh. So for that reason, you do have to spend a fair amount of money actually maintaining the bridge. Where the wood can be cheap, if you have to pay the materials costs to replace that wood over time, it's not really all that cheap. And comparatively, it's fragile. We say fragile, I mean, plenty of things are built out of wood that stand the test of time, boats and buildings and bridges and stuff like that, and they don't crumble to dust. But by the same token, considering other building materials that exist, wood's pretty fragile. So, there's that. It's also pretty susceptible to fire, which is a problem. Um, it's also pretty susceptible to water, which is also a problem. If you don't treat wood, it can absorb water and yeah, and rot or carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is not necessarily that fantastic of a bridge material because carbon fiber can be very brittle. It's light, which is cool, but light is not necessarily something you need in a bridge. Um, it's good to not have a whole lot of dead load, but by and large, carbon fiber is not necessarily flexible enough to be a good bridge material, as I understand it, at least. I could be wrong. There could be some advancements in carbon fiber that change everything, but it's oh yeah no for sure. Carbon fiber is good for vehicles, and it's good for a few other things. Yeah, boats definitely. Um, but yeah, bridges less so. Because boats and planes and stuff like that, you definitely want a fair amount of rigidity in there too. You do want some flexibility so that because if something doesn't, like the old saying goes, if something doesn't bend, it breaks. Um, but you also want a fair amount of sturdiness and rigidity in there as well. More so than you'd want in a bridge. Um, so you got wood, you've also got concrete. It's cheap. Concrete's cheap. Just a bunch of dirt just kind of mixed together in a specific way and then laid out, basically building a dirt and rock bridge. I mean, when you put it like that, how could it not be cheap? It's very good at handling compression. Concrete don't care if you try to smash it. Concrete just sit there. It's fireproof. If you tried setting a regular rock on fire, doesn't really do all that well with fire. You know, granted there are certain types of rocks, but yeah, exactly. So yeah, concrete tends to be pretty fireproof. It tends to be pretty weatherproof as well. Stuff like wind and things like that, it tends to hold its own pretty well against with a couple of exceptions. But it doesn't handle tension well. Concrete will crack under tension, just like people do. Although that's more like kind of emotional and psychological tension I was referring to. Yeah, concrete isn't one of those Bernie rocks. And concrete is impacted pretty strongly by thermal load. So concrete tends to be fairly porous, so water will get in there. And if things get cold, the water freezes, and it just wrecks the concrete from the inside out. Just totally demolishes it. And then suddenly you've got this whole like wrecked empty spot in the middle of it, and then cars drive over it, and then the hard outer shell breaks. I referred to it as soft at first because I was trying to be, I was just trying to be goofy about something, but I didn't really have a parallel, so I went back to normal. But anyway, it's got no support underneath it, and so it'll crack. That's kind of how like potholes are formed. Same thing can happen with bridges, which is really bad because that weakens the structural integrity of the bridge. Not fantastic. Not what you want. Don't want that. You want bridges to be strong and sturdy, have lots of structural integrity. So, in order to increase that structural integrity, you might reinforce the concrete. You might just, as you're making it, stick a whole bunch of metal bars inside of it, which can be pretty effective. In fact, it does a very good job at increasing concrete's ability to withstand tension, because concrete does very well with compression. Press on it, concrete's like, yeah, sure, okay, whatever. And then you start, trying to pull the concrete apart, and it goes, oh no, I don't do very well with this. And then the metal inside goes, don't worry, I got you. I'm providing some additional structure so that you don't actually just crack and fall apart. And in case you do crack, you still got me for structure. I handle tension pretty dang well. And so it tends to have a pretty solid design. It's also still low cost because you don't really use a whole lot of metal, and you don't use really a whole lot of expensive metal. And the bulk of your building material is, well, still rocks. It's fireproof and it's weatherproof, just like concrete is. However, it still doesn't do very well with thermal loads for the same reason, and just the fact that, the metal will also expand and contract, and that will kind of play havoc on concrete. So, pros and cons. Yeah, although the metal isn't on the whole exposed enough to rust a whole lot, although it will still happen. Yeah, this is a very common type of bridge. It's reinforced concrete. You'll see this a lot. A lot. So cast iron, now we're entering into the pure metal bridges category. Cast iron is good. It forms in any shape because you can, cast iron, the name comes from creating a cast and then putting iron into it. And it's good for casting. So it's cast iron because it's cast. Then it's iron. So cast iron. Anyway, it can form in any shape, so you can do more complex designs with it. You can use it for maybe more exotic shapes for your bridge, so that you can do something that's a little bit more efficient at distributing weight and stuff like that. Or maybe it's prettier, if that floats your boat too. Um, it handles compression pretty well because, again, it's metal. It's cool with it, whatever. And it's fireproof because metal doesn't really burn as much. It just more melts generally. And if your bridge is melting, you got bigger problems in your hands than your bridge losing structural integrity. Your more pressing problem is probably the fact that the ambient temperature is high enough to cause metal to melt. In which case, you should probably find a new place to be like 30 seconds ago. Yeah, exactly. Now the cons, it's expensive. Like metal is not exactly a cheap material to build a bridge out of. Does not handle tension well. You can't pull on it necessarily. Oh, the other thing that's nice about casting is you have fewer welding points. Welding points, depending upon the method of welding, can either be the strong or the weak points on a bridge. But either way, they tend to be failure points on a bridge because even if they're the strong points on a bridge, they tend to be only in certain directions. Excuse me. So metal is not one of those things that handles tension well. It tends to break. And then the scary thing about cast iron bridges is they just kind of fall apart. Like they just break. They don't really slowly fail and give you an idea of when they're going to. It's just one day, bam. Imagine something a little bit more dramatic than just my finger snapping. But bam, broken bridge. So there's also that to worry about. But yeah, by and large, metal tends to be a very good option. And when I say breaks without warning, I kind of make it sound a little bit more dramatic than it is. I mean, you're not really going to run into a situation. It's not like cast iron bridges are just falling apart all over the place and, saying crack a pow. It's more that's a rare occurrence. But when it happens, it's pretty spectacular and it's pretty bad. Now we've gone into steel. Now we've entered into the modern fancy bridges. Steel, just like cast iron, can be formed in any shape because it's an alloy, so as you're creating it, you can cast it into a shape. It handles compression and tension like a champ because it's just malleable and flexible enough to be able to. It's fireproof because steel. It's weatherproof because steel. But it's super duper expensive, like ridiculously expensive. Again, because steel can't be mined. You cannot mine steel. Steel is not something that occurs in the earth. It is an alloy. And so you have to manufacture it. Which means it's not just like wood where you can chop a tree down and just kind of shape it. You can't go over to the steel mines and start mining that stuff out. You have to use iron, and you have to use coal coke, and you have to use flux, and you have to, employ people to get this thing that's hot enough to melt this thing, and then also get the impurities out, and then maybe mix it with some other stuff. Like a lot of times there's like a little bit of like nickel in there and things like that, and maybe sometimes some aluminum, and then you got to mix it in the precise amounts, and so it's a very controlled process, and then you have to cast it. And it's a horribly time and labor intensive process compared to these other materials. But when you do it, got a super strong bridge. There's materials lab. Not a terribly interesting material lab. Yeah, copper. Yeah, that's a thing as well. So now, hopefully this gives you some idea of like maybe what material you might want to build a bridge out of, given adequate knowledge about the circumstances under which that bridge will exist in. You know, is it going to have a lot of cars driving across it? Is it going to have any cars driving across it? Is it going to have people walking across it like all the time? It's going to, you know, is it going to be a small bridge? Is it going to have to go across a large expanse or span, I guess, which is the technical term for it? Is it, you know, does it have to allow things to go underneath it? Is it going to be in an area where the weather changes frequently? Is it going to be in an area that's going to be humid or rainy a lot of the time? Is it going to be in an area like so on and so forth? You get the idea. Like if you have that kind of information, you might be able to at least now get a sort of estimate as to what the best material might be. You know, if you're building this for your own house, you should probably use wood. You know, wood wouldn't be a bad idea. You know, if you just like bridging a little creek or something like that, wood, sure. Now, bridge shapes, because the shape of the bridge is, yeah, pretty much. Um, the shape of the bridge is going to be something that you're going to want to take into account because the shape of the bridge will also determine how effective it is at carrying loads. Rectangle bridges, like this thing right here, not that great. Yeah, exactly. Reinforced steel. Yeah, I brought out my TIG welder and I spent, you know, I spent about a year and a half building this thing and I had to take out a second mortgage on the house, but man, I rest easy at night knowing my ankles aren't ever going to get wet walking over this bridge. Exactly, worth it. Um, but yeah, rectangle design, nice. Rectangle design is the least stable. Um, not very good at holding itself or other things up. It does well enough, obviously. I mean, the fact that these bridges exist in modern day means that they probably haven't fallen over yet, which means that probably are stable enough, but it's not a great idea. I don't really necessarily recommend it on something that you want to, you know, have stay up. But it'll do the trick in a pinch. Arch bridges are best for compression, and you might want to strengthen them with a buttress, which is an actual thing. It's not just a made-up word that resembles butt. Um, a buttress is a type of support. Um, but yeah, you can use a buttress to strengthen an arch and make it even stronger. And it does really well for compression because it spreads that force all over the length of the arch. So you don't just have these hot spots. Yeah, you don't say. You don't just have these hot spots on the bridge where, you know, they're just going to be failure points. So arches are good for that. And then you got triangle bridges. Triangle bridges do really well with both compression and tension. And they're strongest at the points. Now, again, the reason why these bridges are very good, I say are in the affirmative, not aren't. The reason why these bridges are very good is because they're able to spread that force around, like I was saying. You want to be able to do that because you don't want any specific one point on the bridge to experience so much force that the material fails there. If you can spread the force out to other points on the bridge, you know, share the love, so to speak, distribute the force, well then your bridge overall will be able to withstand more force because, you know, let's say you've got a material that can withstand 5,000 psi before it snaps. If every single point on your bridge is experiencing 4,990 psi, technically haven't reached the failure point of that material. Now, you probably have a whole lot of weight on the bridge so that every single point on the bridge is experiencing that much force. But the fact that your bridge is able to effectively spread around all of that force means that, again, that weight on the bridge is probably higher than 5,000 pounds. Like, is extremely heavy. Now, if you have a bridge that is very inefficient at distributing weight, it will be a lot easier for a given spot on the bridge to experience that maximum force and snap. So you tend to be able to, excuse me, you tend to be able to carry higher loads on bridges. Yeah, it's something like that. It's in that vicinity, maybe plus or minus 3 tons. You're able to carry higher loads because the bridge is able to distribute that weight evenly and that force evenly. The shape slab. It's the shape slab. Anyway, now for a little bit of history about bridges. And I'm going through a lot of stuff right now, but I kind of want to make sure we cover all this stuff so that we can actually get started on the doing stuff part of this lesson by Wednesday. So anyway, Rome was really the first society to build great bridges. I mean, the Greeks built cool stuff too, but they were about sort of the same-ish time. And then, a lot of civilizations before that, they didn't really build like amazing, awesome, fantastic bridges like Rome did. Like Rome built some serious bridges. Serious bridges. Like some for real stuff. So, that's kind of why they get the credit for it. And a lot of their design techniques are still implemented in bridges today. They used these bridges since the Roman Empire doesn't really exist anymore. I think we can safely use past tense. They used these bridges to connect and maintain the empire. They wore suits and sunglasses. I don't follow. Oh, cool bridges. Oh, I get you. Ow. I get it now. Now, one of the things that Rome is very famous for, yeah, exactly, har har, is the arch bridge. The arch bridge is very useful for crossing over rivers that have river traffic because stuff then can go under it. I mean, nobody's really surprised by that. But that is definitely a thing that they're known for, and it's a very popular design, which is in use even today. So, good work, Romans. We're still doing as the Romans do, and we're not even in Rome. The arches in the Colosseum. Yeah. Thank you. And then, presumably, nothing much happened with bridges for years and years and years and years. Until iron really came along and was widely used. And people went, hey, what if we... Oh, yeah, talking to the Romans. Well, I was going to take the compliment, but... oh, well. And went, hey, what if we use this iron to make this bridge? We got enough of it, and then they built a bridge out of it, and they went, hey, this is actually a pretty strong bridge, until one of them randomly failed one day. But, on the whole, they were able to do more with iron. What kind of more, might you be asking, did they do with iron? Well, they were able to start to develop and build the suspension bridge, they being humans in the past. I'm not an alien, I promise. Um, but yeah, the suspension bridge, which is actually immensely useful because it's able to cross spans that other types of bridges can't really even touch. Like you can't build an arch bridge across a span that large. Suspension bridge, however, is able to just support like a champ because the iron is strong enough to be able to be used on something like a suspension bridge. It's pretty stable. It's no Tacoma Narrows Bridge, so. So the Brooklyn Bridge is actually one of the first modern suspension bridges built across a great expanse, they say. I mean, yeah, it's a pretty long expanse, so good job. Did a good job with the Brooklyn Bridge there. But the Brooklyn Bridge may be one of the first ones. But the Golden Gate is definitely the most famous one, or one of the most famous ones. I mean, you look at that and you go, yep, Golden Gate Bridge. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's that one right there. The Orange Gate Bridge. Yeah. I kind of wonder if it was like oxidation. I was talking about this with my middle school class. I'm not entirely sure why it's the Golden Gate Bridge because, I mean, I know that California is known as the Golden State, um, but I don't know what makes this the Golden Gate because it goes from one spot in California to another spot in California. So it's not like it's a gateway to the Golden State. Is that what it is? Okay, well that explains it. Thank you, Mateo. Got the answer right there. Gold paint, all stripped off. So yeah, there you go. It used to be golden. That explains a lot. I come from that state and I don't even know about the history of my own bridge. But whatever. Oh well. But the Golden Gate, yeah, definitely one of the most famous suspension bridges in the world. Now, I've talked about like how you want some flexibility in a bridge and you want to be able to build a bridge that has some give with forces being exerted on it, but you don't want too much necessarily. Because uh, too much flexibility can actually cause a bridge to collapse. Like the Tacoma Narrows suspension bridge actually collapsed because of that. The wind. Oh yeah. Okay, so you know all about it. Yeah, the collapse was actually caused by the wind hitting a specific frequency on it, if I remember correctly. Um, Sort of a similar thing being like, what is it, harmonic resonance. Um, like that whole stereotype about opera singers like hitting a certain note and causing glasses to shatter and stuff like that. A similar sort of thing where the wind was actually causing the the waves in the bridge, yeah, an engineering error, the waves in the bridge to actually be more extreme than they would be even if the winds were a little bit, faster or higher, more intense. And it just sort of snapped itself apart. Yeah, 20-foot waves. That's crazy. Can you imagine a bridge doing that? I try not to. Anyway, so yeah, flexibility can be a problem but yeah, it's pretty gnarly to watch. Sometimes you want flexibility. This is the Bay Bridge. It just looks like the Bay Bridge in California, in the Bay Area. Well, it was still under construction. It just recently completed, like in the last 6 years. And you in some place like California, you want some flexibility in the case of like earthquakes, because that's bad. It's real bad. Um, if an earthquake shakes a bridge apart, that's real bad. And they've actually had problems with that in California with earthquakes shaking bridges and breaking them. Collapsing them. That was a really terrible thing to have happened. But yes, so sometimes, yeah, sometimes those pop up. Sometimes, engineering is, like it says here, often a series of trade-offs. Sometimes you want a bridge that's more flexible because it suits your purposes better. Sometimes you want a bridge that's less flexible because you don't want it to fall apart. So it's all about making the most appropriate decisions you can given the constraints and the requirements that you have. So with that in mind, we're not actually going to get started on it today, but on Wednesday we're going to get started with some bridge design software. It's the West Point Bridge Designer, Contest Designer software. Anyway, yeah, anyway, the bridge contest. Yeah, definitely, I'm going to send it. Now, I actually followed it first because I was hoping that it was going to pop up with the security warning. You guys are probably going to get a security warning when you visit the site. Certainly with Chrome, and I believe with some versions of Firefox, you should still be able to. There should be an option for an advanced. Like when you see it's like, oh, this is not safe. The certificate on it is old and it's listed as an HTTP secure site. So Chrome's going to freak out on it. But we've used this site in the past. We know this is the legit one. They just don't update the certificate on it for some reason. So you're going to get this thing as like, this website is not safe. You probably shouldn't visit here. But if with Chrome, there should be a link labeled advanced at the bottom. Click on that, expand it, and then there will be another link which appears which says continue to it anyway. So just go ahead and click that. Generally, you don't want to do that unless you know exactly where you're going and what you're doing and you can trust it. I'm just saying in this specific situation, you can, in fact, continue to the site anyway in order to be able to download the file. So yeah, there's that. If you guys could just go ahead and download that in time for Wednesday, we'll go ahead and get started on Wednesday with the Bridge Designer software. Otherwise, that does it for today. So I'm going to go ahead and do the poll questions, and then we'll leave it open a little bit for question and answer time. I've got something I've got to do at 9, so I will unfortunately have to cruise on out right around then. But let's go ahead and get this started now, so we can at least get some of the questions addressed if you guys have any, and do the poll questions. And first poll question incoming.